teaching career as a lecturer in Mizoram Government College and later on joined the Mizoram University in the Department of Political Science. Professor Dungal has published a number of books and research papers in various journals as well as in different papers. Sir has also been successfully conducting various national seminars. Sir was also a member of research core team established by the Home Ministry Commission of the Ministry of Home Affairs Government of India. At present, Sir is the director of IQAC in Mizoram University. Sir has also evaluated more than 20 theses and 8 MPhil dissertations of different universities. The list is endless. Well, we are glad to have such an eminent personality amidst us for this session. Now I request Sir to kindly begin with his lecture. Over to you, Sir.
Okay. Okay, let me share the screen.
You can share now.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, as it is just announced now, I'll deliver a lecture on governance and leadership in tribal areas of Northeast India. And I'm so sorry for the inconvenience due to technical problem because of shutdown of internet connection in the university campus. And let me carry on, starting with introduction. The northeastern region of India was known and identified as Assam since British period because British Empire demarcated different hill tribes of the region in the provincial government of Assam. Prior to that, hill tribes were never under the control of the outsiders. They were neither under the control of the plain Hindus or Muslims. And as I've said, the region as a whole, as tribal areas, hill areas were demarcated inside the province of Assam, the whole area was known as Assam. And as we know, Assam was known as Pragjotisa in ancient time, Kamrupa in medieval time, and the name Assam came to be used in modern time. So the term Assam is used more or less equivalent to Northeast India in many instances earlier. And when did the term Northeastern region came into being officially? The term Northeast India or Northeastern region began to be used officially with the enactment of Northeastern Area Reorganization Act of 1971 by the Indian Parliament. That's why the terminology Northeast India officially began to be used with the enactment of Northeastern Area Reorganization Act 1971 or NERA 1971. And even after the official use of this term Northeast, Assam continued to be used as for identifying the region by people of the mainland India, because many people of the mainland India, they don't know many northeastern states, but when only Assam is mentioned, they came to know, they began to have some idea only. And the present northeastern states of India, except Manipur and Tripura, were previously districts of Assam due to administrative arrangement of the British Empire. And as I've just mentioned now, the Northeastern Area Reorganization Act created 3 new states, namely Manipur, Meghalaya, and Tripura, and 2 new union territories, Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram. And Before the creation of 3 new states and 2 new union territories by NERA, there were only 2 states in the region. Those were Assam and Nagaland. And as we know, in every social setup, there was governance, and in every governance system, there are leaders and followers. Every society since ancient time has some type of governance, and governance is usually the responsibility of the leaders. That's why governance and leadership go hand in hand. Tribal territories of Northeast India has chieftainship as the governance system, and the leadership of that governance system was the chief. The 3 organs of government, namely legislative, executive, and judiciary, are concentrated upon the chief in chieftainship system. And chieftainship was abolished with the introduction of democratic constitution in many tribal territories of Northeast India, but it still remained and it is still retained in specific tribal area even now. And now we shall come to governance and leadership in tribal areas during pre-British era. Before colonialism, before the coming of the British, what was the status of governance and leadership in tribal area? Different tribes of Northeast India were independent in their own way because they didn't have overlord. Every village was ruled by chief, and such was the tradition. And tribals in Northeast India are Mongoloid, but they are not Aryans or Dravidians. And chieftainship was the system of governance, and tribals of Northeast India were never colonized by outside forces, neither by Hindu rulers nor Muslim Nawabs. And these different tribal groups, they live independently and happily without any external control. And all the hill areas, the hill districts, they had traditional rulers, and the chief governed his people by following traditional customs and convention. Manipur and Tripura, they were princely states. They had kings, but traditional tribal administrative system was also not disturbed in those 2 princely states. In fact, the royal family of Tripura himself was a tribal, and the reign of the king of Manipur also did not extend in hill areas of Manipur. In such a way, even in these tribal areas in Tripura and Manipur, they had their own independent system of chieftainship. Tribals had different types of chieftainships, like hereditary chieftainship, autocratic chieftainship, dictatorial chieftainship, democratic and republican chieftainship. And one thing which should be pointed out here is that hereditary or autocratic chieftainship could be found among different tribes of the Zhou ethnic group. When I mean the Zhou ethnic group, it includes Chin, Kuki, Mizo group. All the Zhou ethnic group, they had this autocratic and hereditary chieftainship. And on the other hand, different Naga tribes, some Naga tribes, they had republican chieftainship. And majority of the tribal communities, they had hereditary and autocratic chieftainship. In Khasi Hills, the Khasis had Siams. Then in Garo Hills, Garos had Nokmas. Then different Naga tribes like Au, Angami, Sema, who are now known as Sumi, Lotha, Konyak, Chakisang, Zeleng, Chang, Pom, Yimchungal, then others. They also had their own system of chieftainship, and the main concern of the chief, being leader of the chieftainship governance, was to protect his land, his people, and to keep his people intact under his leadership. Then there were ferocious tribes of Northeast Frontal Tracts, present Arunachal Pradesh, like Abol, Adi, Akas, Daflas, Mismi, Khamtis, Singpos, and there are many other tribes also. They also had their own system of chieftainship, And the main concern of the chief was to govern his people and to protect the land and to protect his people from encroachers. And coming to Lusai Hills, in Lusai Hills also, there were Silo chiefs, other Lusai chiefs, Poi chiefs, then Lakher chiefs. And most of the chiefs in Lusai Hills, they had their overlord in Chin Hills, and there were many powerful chiefdoms in Chin Hills. So there were powerful chiefdoms like Falam, Halkha, Thantlang, Zolkho, and Sakta in Chin Hills, who had jurisdiction over different territories like Lusai Hills, Arakan, Chittagong, then even up to the southern part of Manipur, Burmese Plain, and Tripura. So different hill tribes of Northeast India, they were never part of Assam, they were never part of Bengal, or they were never part of Burma. So politics of hill areas of the region at that time was protection of land, preservation of their identity, and to fight against encroacher who tried to invade them. And now governance and leadership in British period. We all know the main intention of the British coming to India was business motive and commercial gain. And to point out that British East India Company came as a company, a trading company, to trade with India. But having found that the political masters of India were weak at that time, they took advantage of it. And those people who came as traders, they became political master of the whole country. And in the initial stage, British authority tried to avoid military confrontation with the hill tribes because why? Why they want to avoid this military confrontation with the hill tribes? Because that was directed by Supreme Government of London. In what way? Because the Supreme Government of London and the British government felt that to involve in military conflict with the hill tribes, they might incur more expenditure than the revenue that they had to obtain. Because of that, as far as practicable, the intention of the British administration was to avoid military conflict with the hill tribes and to keep in good terms with them. That's why, as I've said, hill tribes in Indo-Burma frontal tracts, they were neither part of Burma, Bengal, or Assam. And they were independent in their own way. They were not under the influence of Ahom, Mughal, or Burma. And having seen about the social structure, political ambition, and autonomy of the hill tribes, the British also followed the policy of non-interference, and they also did not want to interfere in the internal matters of the tribals. But this non-interference policy of the British was misjudged by the hill tribes as weakness. So that was also miscalculation of many hill tribes. And as a result of that, the British annexed the tribal area one after another. Why? Because different hill tribes of the region, tribes from Lusai Hills, Garo Hills, Khasi Hills, Jantia Hills, Northeast Frontier Tracts, and Naga Hills, they were addicted in raiding the plain area, returning to their village with human head, returning with slaves and booty. And returning with human head, slaves and booty was regarded as heroic work, patriotic work by the people. Because of that, most of the hill tribes, they were indulged in raiding and carrying surprise attack in the plain area. And due to that, British subjects in the plain area, they were with fear psychosis. And to bring confidence in the mind of the British, of the subject, the British administration had the duty to contain the hill tribes. That's why different tribal areas were annexed one after another. And after the Burmese were defeated in the Anglo-Burmese War, one treaty was signed at Yandabo on 24th February 1826, which was popularly known as Treaty of Yandabo 1826. And with the signing of this Treaty of Yandabo on 24th February 1826, British annexation in Northeast India started, and different regions of Northeast India and particularly the hill tribes, they were annexed one after another. And the first hill tribes with whom the British came into contact was the Garo. So Garo Hills was annexed in 1822, Kasar in 1830, Jantia Hills in 1883, Khasi Hills in 1835, and Lusai Hills in 1890. Then after that, North Kasar Hills, Naga Hills, Northeast Frontier Tracts were also annexed one after another. And as I've said, these hill district, these hill territories, these hill tribal territories were independent in their own way earlier. But after annexation, they were demarcated inside the provincial government of Assam, so they became part of Assam. And as I've said, the first hill tribe with whom the British came into contact was the Garo. And when David Scott was the magistrate of Rangpur who looked after Garo area, he came to know that these tribals in hill districts, they had peculiar custom, culture, and tradition. That's why the same law and governance which were applicable in the plain area may not be suitable for this hill area. That's why one new regulation was enacted by the British Authority for governing the hill area, and this was known as Regulation 10 of 1822. Then, what was the peculiarity of this Regulation 10 of 1822 apart from other regulation? Because this Regulation 10 of 1822 was the first regulation enforced by the British Authority for governing hill tribes in Eastern Bengal and Assam. That's why Regulation 10 of 1822 was the first regulation enforced by the British for governing hill tribes in the present Northeast India and Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh. At that time, it was known as Eastern Bengal and Assam. And the British acquired Sylhet in 1765, and they came door to door with the Khasis. And the British Authority experienced Khasis raid from time to time, and some Khasi chiefs like Tirot Singh bravely fought with the British for 4 years, but after that he was subdued. And in such a way, other Khasi chiefs were also defeated. Then Khasi territory was annexed. And after that, Jantia Hills was also annexed by the British. And coming to Lusai Hills, before coming to Lusai Hills, then Garos. These Garos, as I've said, Garos were the first whom the British came into contact, and they were annexed already in 1822. Then, with regard to these Lusai Hills, so Lusai Hills was also attacked by the British twice. And the British experienced raid by people of Lusai Hills for the first time in Kasar in 1845. Even before the coming of the British, also there were raid. But the greatest raid at Alexandra Purti Garden at Kasar on 22nd January 1871. Here, two Silo chiefs, Benkoya Silo and Savunga Silo, who were brothers. Benkoya was chief of Sailam and Savunga was chief of Buarpui. So under their leadership, surprise attack was done at Alexandrapur Tea Garden, and the owner of that tea garden, James Winchester, was killed, and his daughter Mary Winchester was captured, and she was taken as captive to Lusai Hills. And along with attack on this Alexandrapur tea garden, many other tea gardens in Kachar, Chittagong, and Tripura were also attacked. And because of this, Lusai Hills was attacked from Kachar and Chittagong in 1871-72, which was known as Lusai Expedition of 1871-72. And in this, the chiefs were defeated, and Mary Winchester was rescued from the Silo chief. Then the British Authority warned Chief of Lusai Hills not to raid the plain area again. But as raiding plain area was one of the greatest hobby. It was a patriotic work for the tribals. They could not stop. So raid continued. And due to frequent raid of Lai chiefs, Mara chiefs, and Lusai chiefs from South Lusai Hills in Chittagong Hill Trek, British revenue collection in Chittagong Hill Trek declined from 89,109 to 83,222. And this decline in revenue collection was taken so seriously by the British. On the other hand, there was also a lot of disturbance in British territory in Burmese plain by many powerful chiefdom of Chin Hills. And to contain these Chin Hills and Lusai Hills, Chin Lusai Expedition 1889-1890 was conducted. Chin Hills was attacked from two directions, northern Chin Hills and southern Chin Hills. Then Lusai Hills was also attacked from two directions, South Lusai Hills and North Lusai Hills. Then after that, British administration started in Lusai Hills. And with regard to this Northeast Frontier Tract, in this Northeast Frontier Tracts also there were many tribes, and those tribes, they were annexed one after another. British administration was introduced, and the whole region, it was known as officially Northeast Frontier Tracts in 1914. And in such a way, in Naga Hills also, the whole territory was annexed. But two tribal territories, they became only part of British Empire only in the late 1920s. One was Tonsang area in Naga Hills, became part of British Empire only in 1920. Then the other one was Zongli, which was not a Zono to the Mara. It was also becoming part of British Empire only in the 1920s. And when these hill tribes were put under British rule, some regulations were introduced by the British in order to govern them, in order to administer them. So some of those laws which were enforced for governing hill tribes of undivided Assam were Regulation 10 of 1822, Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation 1873, Scheduled District Act of 1874, Chin Hills Regulation 1896, Government of India Act of 1935. And this Government of India Act of 1935 classified hill district or hill people into excluded and partially excluded area. So, as I've said, even during British period, even after tribal areas were under their jurisdiction, the British did not interfere directly in the internal administration. So the traditional chieftainship was recognized and rule of the chief was also recognized. That means even during British period, so chieftainship system and leadership of the chief continued. But as a result of this classification of tribal areas into excluded and partially excluded area. Excluded area means tribal area which were totally backward, where reform and normal administration could not be introduced. Because of that, they were totally excluded from reform and normal administration. Those tribal areas which were declared as excluded areas were Lusai Hills, Northeast Frontier Tracts, then Naga Hills, and North Kasar Hills. And there were a bit developed tribal area where a little bit of reform and normal administration could be introduced. And in such hill districts, reform and normal administration were partially introduced, like Garo Hills, Khasi Zentia Hills, and Mikir Hills. And this partially excluded area, they could send representative in Assam Legislative Assembly. And as a result of that, democratic system and leadership of democratic leader emerged in some tribal society. Mention could be made of Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy. This Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy, he was a Khasi leader. He was a pastor ordained by Church of God. And through his concern for society and for upliftment of betterment of the society, he was invited to contest MLA election. So He contested MLA election. He was member of Assam Legislative Assembly from 1921 till his death in 1959. And the unique thing about this Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy was that even after he became MLA and Cabinet Minister of Assam, he continued his church ministry as pastor. That's why even in official name, he wrote his name as Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy. And besides being MLA, he also became Cabinet Minister of Assam 5 times. And not only that, he was member of the Constituent Assembly, and he was also member of the subcommittee, Bordoloi subcommittee, which concerned with the political status of tribals of undivided Assam. So in such a way, democratic leadership emerged even among the tribal society. Okay, then we shall come to emergence of democratic leadership in tribal areas on the eve of independence. So I have just mentioned about emergence of some democratic leadership. And it should also be noted that wherever British Empire reads, that British Empire will always be followed by missionaries preaching gospel of Jesus Christ. And missionaries not only preach the gospel, but they also introduce primary education for the native people. And however literary education the native people got it, that even that literary education was an eye-opener for them to know about their situation, and that literary knowledge also gave them political awareness to think for their people and for their area. In such a way, political awakening started for the first time among the tribals of undivided Assam in Khassia Jantia Hills. Because as we know, Shillong was the headquarters of British provincial government of Assam for many years. And because of that, people in Khasi Jantia Hills, they were the first to be aware politically. So Jantia Darbar was formed in 1900 AD, and this was the first political organization formed among the tribal areas of Northeast India. Then after that, Khasi National Darbar was formed by Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy. Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy himself became secretary of the Darbar. And after Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy was elected as member of Legislative Assembly from provincial government of Assam legislature, one of his followers, Joab Solomon, became the secretary. Then what we know, the Simon Commission, Indian Statutory Commission came to India in 1928. To that Indian Statutory Commission also, one memorandum was submitted by Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy and other tribal leaders. Then in Khasi Hills, there was some political confrontation between Nichols Roy, Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy, and some of his opponents. And in such a way, Khasi Jantia Hills was the first politically aware hill district. Then Khasi Jantia Young Men's Association was also formed again in 1928. And as I've said, MacDonald Kharkongor, he was the political opponent of Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy. In such a way, this democratic movement and democratic politicking started first among the Khasi society. Then, I'll go a little bit faster. That's why, as the time goes by, Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy, he became cabinet minister under Sadwala government in Assam, and after that, under Bordoloi also, he became cabinet minister again. Then, political awakening started first in Khasi Jantia Hills. And after that, in Naga Hills, in 1945, the Deputy Commissioner of Naga Hills, C.R. Pose, he formed one forum called Naga Hills District Council. So the main purpose for forming this forum was like the formation of Indian National Congress by A.O. Hume in 1885. That means That should be a forum of discussion for Naga intellectual, how to help and how to be helpful to be the British administration. Then in 1946, this body reorganized itself as a political platform and changed its name to Naga National Council under the leadership of Aliba Imtiao, who was the son of a Baptist pastor. Then in 1947, when Bordoloi Committee visited different, subcommittee visited different hill districts of Assam, Bordoloi Committee also recognized that though non-official, this NNC got good recognition and support from the Naga people. And that's why this NNC fought for autonomy. And as NNC fought for autonomy, so on the eve of independence also, when Azet Fijo took over leadership of this NNC, self-placed visit was conducted declaring that 99% Nagas did not want to be under India. And due to that, even after independence, Naga Hills, they boycotted independence. Then coming to Lusai Hills. In Lusai Hills also, MacDonald, he tried to form one forum called District Conference. And in this District Conference, there should be 20 representatives from the chiefs and 20 representatives from commoner. But because of the unrepresented nature, this was not supported by the first political party of Mizoram, Mizo Union. The first political party of Lusai Hills, Mizo Union, was formed on 9 April 1946. Then 1 year after the formation of Mizo Union, United Mizo Freedom Organization was formed on 5th July 1947. Then after 2 years, Poilakal Tribal Union was formed in 1949. So in such a way, both in the partially excluded area and excluded area, political awakening started. First in Khasi Zentia Hills, then Naga Hills, Garo Hills, then Lusai Hills, Mikir Hills, then in North Kachar Hills. In such a way, political awakening started. Then in Garo Hills also, particularly after the Second World War, because of growing literacy, then due to those army men returning to their respective villages and knowing about the outside world. Then Garo National Conference, GNC, came to be formed in 1948, where Modi Marak was the president. And after that, leadership was taken over by Captain W.S. Sangma, who became the popular leader of the whole Northeast tribal afterwards. So in such a way, political awakening started among the hill districts of Assam. And as this political awakening started, many political parties came to be formed, like Mizo Union and United Mizo Freedom Organization in Lusai Hills, Khasi National Darbar in Khasi Hills, Zentia National Darbar in Zentia Hills, Garo National Council. And after that, for tribals of all undivided Assam, Eastern India Tribal Union and All Party Leaders Conference also came up. And now we shall discuss governance and leadership in tribal areas after independence. So on the eve of independence, a great fear psychosis was there in the minds of tribals. Then these tribals, they were fearful of losing their land, autonomy, ethnic identity, their language, traditional tribal practices, and custom. And having known that tribals were in vulnerable position, Reverend J.M. Nichols Roy, he submitted memorandum to Cabinet Mission Team. Cabinet Mission Team comprised of 3 cabinet ministers from Britain who were sent to India to study about the situation in India and to study about possibility for quick handling of government authority to Indian hands. And the leader of this cabinet mission team was Sir Stafford Cripps, and 2 of his colleagues were Patrick Lawrence and A.V. Alexander. And just before the cabinet mission team left for London, Reverend J.J.M. Nichols Roy submitted one memorandum apprising them about the status of the tribals. We tribal peoples were independent earlier. We had our own system and we were independent people. You came, you colonized us, and how will you leave us now? Then he apprised that. Then after that, the British cabinet mission, just before leaving India, they called press conference on 16 May 1946 and strongly suggested Constituent Assembly of India to establish one advisory committee which should study about fundamental rights and rights of minorities and tribals of excluded and partially excluded area. And as a result of that, advisory committee on fundamental rights, minorities, tribals and excluded area was set up with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel as chairman on 24th January 1947. Then this committee made some arrangement, and this committee came to know that the area of tribal territories in India was so vast. So they set up three subcommittees. One was concerned with Northeast Frontier Assam Tribal and Excluded Area Subcommittee. That means to study about the status of tribals in Northeast. One was about Northwest Frontier Province, Balochistan, that means which is now part of Pakistan. Then the other is excluded and partially excluded in province other than Assam subcommittee. And this subcommittee was about the mainland India. So in Northeast Frontier Assam Tribal and Excluded Area Committee, Bodoloi was the chairman. Then there were other members also. So this Bodoloi committee visited different hill districts of Assam, and then they prepared their report, and those report, it was submitted to Vallabhbhai Patel. Then after that, it was discussed in the advisory committee. Then after that, it was arranged and was discussed for 3 hectic days in the Constituent Assembly on 5, 6, and 7 September 1949. And there were many supporters and opponents of the draft schedule, like Rohini Komal Chowdhury, Kuladhar Chaliha from Assam, and some other, they opposed it. But there were some who supported it. So after 3 days of hectic debate, this provision was accepted. It was inserted in 6th schedule of the Constitution of India, then in Article 244 Clause 2 and 2751 of the Constitution, and it concerns with establishment of autonomous district council for tribal area. Then, as a result of this 6th schedule provision, tribals of undivided Assam were categorized into 2, Part A and Part B. In Part A, there were United Khasi Jantia Hills, Garo Hills, Lusai Hills, Naga Hills, North Kachar Hills, Mikir Hills. Then in Part B, Northeast Frontier Tracts and Naga Tribal Area. Part A means 6th schedule where autonomous district council could be established. Then Part B means 6th schedule where autonomous district council could not be established. So in such a way, step was taken up. Then in Part A districts, ADC, Autonomous District Council, could be established in all the hill districts except Naga Hills. And with regard to this Part B were under direct rule Governor of Assam. So in such a way, 6th schedule was the first democratic governance which the tribal experience. Then from 6th schedule status, the tribals got higher political status as statehood, like Nagaland, then Union Territory of Mizoram, then after that Mizoram state, then state of Meghalaya. So in such a way, 6th schedule was the first democratic governance system tribal experience, and after that Union Territory, then after that statehood. In such a way, when the tribal status is discussed after independence, it cannot be discussed minus the 6th schedule. But this provision is still denied to many tribal areas, hill tribes, particularly like tribals in hill areas of Manipur. Earlier, it was also denied to tribals in Tripura, but it was introduced afterwards. Then one thing that we have to know is that after this democratic governance, then insurgency cropped up in many tribal areas, first in Naga Hills, and after that in Lusai Hills, then in many other areas also. In such a way, governance and leadership, governance earlier was chieftainship, then leadership was chiefship. But now that has been replaced by what? It has been replaced by democratic system and democratic leadership. So such is the system now. In such a way, democratic system or democratic governance has now replaced chieftainship, and the rule of the chief has also now been replaced by rule of democratic leader. So in such a way, transformation and change took place in many tribal area. Okay, let me conclude my lecture here. And if there is any query, okay, we'll open time for that.
Thank you, sir, for such a detailed historical explanation of the tribal on the tribal issues. We have actually come to a come to an end of a very fruitful session. Hope all our participants have been immensely benefited with sir's detailed, elaborate discussion on the proposed topic. Sir, one or two queries are there. I would like the participants either to unmute themselves, those who have queries, so that you can clarify your queries as sir is there in line. Okay. I think, yeah, for the time being. If there are no queries, sir, there are one or two queries in the chat box.
Okay.
One is that one has requested to kindly elaborate the Treaty of Yandabu as to how it led to the consecutive annexation of hill areas. So one of our participants has requested you to elaborate on the Treaty of Yandabu and its relation with annexation of hill areas. No. They are finance, they are and all of us. Huh? So we keep on discussing many times.
Any other query?
One more query is there, sir. So
okay.
One wants to have an idea of yours, as when you have mentioned regarding the ferocious tribes of Apor, Adi, Dofala, the participant wants to know actually where they're really ferocious. So these two are the queries, sir.
Pardon, will you please repeat the second query?
Yes, sir. So one of our participants wants your clear observation or wants your explanation whether Apor, Adi, Dofala are really ferocious tribes, as has been mentioned by you.
Yeah. This Treaty of Yandabo, it was signed between British government and Burmese king after Burmese were defeated in Anglo-Burmese war. And as a result of this Treaty of Yandabo, agreement was signed that Burmese authority, Burmese king should no longer disturb British territory. Then British agents should be stationed in the capital of Burmese king. Then in such a way, the region for the first time was comprehensively under the rule of the British for the first time. And why I mentioned that with the signing of Treaty of Yandabo, annexation in different Northeast India extended, because the only hill tribes, the only tribal community who were annexed by the British before the Treaty of Yandabo was only the Garo tribes, only the Garo hills. But other hill districts, annexation of other hill districts started only after the Treaty of Yandabo. Because with the signing of the Treaty of Yandabo, British Empire was well established in Assam. And after it was well established in Assam, only then annexation and extension was carried out by the British Empire. Because of that, if we go in detail with these two Treaty of Yandabo, it may take another lecture, That's why I cannot go in detail. But why it is connected with annexation of Northeast India? Because after the British Empire was were established in the northeastern region only, then annexation started. In such a way, hill areas of Assam were annexed one after another. And why I use these ferocious terms? Ferocious tribes or ferocious people. This was the term not coined by me, but by colonial writers, British administrators, and writers at that time. Because of that, this term was used. And it was not only with regard to those tribes of Northeast frontier tracts, but even hill tribes in Lusai Hills, Naga Hills, Khasi Hills, or Garo Hills also. They were termed as ferocious tribes by the British. That's why, so to say, that was colonial term.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope our participants are clear now. We come to an end of this technical session. Thank you, sir, for your words of wisdom. It was indeed a delight to hear from you and have a clear glimpse of our past historical background. Looking forward for more such deliberations to hear from you in near future, sir. Thank you once again for sparing your valuable time with us and enriching us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for
Small
your patience.
Thank you, sir. A small announcement. We shall now take a short 5 minutes break for tea, and we shall resume back our next technical session with the same link. So we have cut short. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, some of the news I feel that it's not very
Hello. Honorable. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, sir.
Ah,
Uh,
can you hear me?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Jyotsna video.
অনিতা বনিতা
40 হৈছে স্যাৰ আহি পাইছে
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে
স্যাৰে ভিডিঅ'টো অন কৰি ল'ব নেকি
এপলটো বৰ দিগদাৰী পাওঁ ভিডিঅ' আছে তাকেতো কম্পিউটাৰ জানো এইটো হেল্ল'
হয় স্যাৰ শুনি আছো স্টাৰ্ট কৰিব পাৰো স্যাৰ জোৎস্না বাইদেউ স্টাৰ্ট কৰি দিয়ক
বনিতা start কৰো
হয়
okay a very good afternoon to all of you thank you so much welcome to the 8th technical session of day 3 dear participants I hope you all are comfortable enough hearing to all these academicians. Now, Professor Apurva Kumar Bora sir, retired professor, Department of Political Science, Nehu, Shillong, is present among us. May I introduce Professor Bora sir? Professor Bora will deliver his lecture on governance, democracy, and development. Professor Apurva Kumar Bora is the former Dean of Schools of Social Science and former professor and head of the Department of Political Science, Nehu. He is the president of Swastha Samaj Vikas Chakra, a non-party organization of intellectuals and social activists, a gender right activist, president of the Forum Against Sexual Harassment. He completed his academic career from Dibrugarh University and Punjab University as well. His area of interest are ethnic conflicts, tribal traditions and democratic governance, youth movements, human rights and political theory. And he is a life member of, former member of Indian Council of Social Science and Research, New Delhi, member of Indo-Russia Joint Commission on Social Science and Research. He was also the founder secretary and former vice president of Northeast India Social Science Congress. He is even a guest faculty of University of Madras. His publications are, he has published 8 numbers of books, 5 in English and 3 in SMS, and almost published over 50 articles in research journals and magazines. Dr. Barua has visited University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, London School of Political Science, London, to present papers in seminars. Now, may I request you, sir, to be on the dais, and the platform is yours, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, this is a topic on which actually I started writing about 4 years back. And one of my articles was published sometime in 2015 in Assam Tribune, which gave about what I think about these 3 things: governance, democracy, and development. But before I go into the topic, let me tell you a small story. Once a 7-year-old son asked his father, "What is government?" And the father told him it's like a family. He said the government is not alone, it's in a state. And a government therefore is like a family. And for instance, in our family, I take all decisions. So I am the government. And then you have your mother who regulates things, controls even me. and therefore she is the law. And then you have a grandmother who knows everything about what is happening in the family and tells everyone what is happening. So she is the media. You have a baby brother who keeps crying all the time, making demands. He is the civil society. And then you have the maid, and the maid does all the work in the family. And therefore the maid is the people. The son got a little confused, didn't know what exactly his father said. So many characters, so many things to remember. And anyway, he went off to sleep at night, and then he woke up and wanted to go to the toilet. And he went through the bedroom of his parents and found the mother was fast asleep. Father was not there. And then he went to the next room. His grandmother was cleaning his toys because he has dirtied the bed. He went further down because the toilet was down there and he heard some sound. When he heard sound, he followed it and he went into the kitchen. And he found to his utter surprise that his father was on top of their maid, and she was resisting, she was shouting. And his father was saying, "You keep quiet." He waited for some time and said loudly, "Daddy, I now know what the government is." And the father was askance, didn't know. Asked, "What did you say?" He said, "No, I know what the government is. It rapes the people when the law is asleep. That is what a government is." But then, when you look at the situation today, you'd notice that because of this pandemic, all governments are in trouble. The most advanced governments in the West, like the United States of America, has failed to control things in their own country. And you know what is happening. All sorts of things are happening all over the world, and the governments simply are not able to control things. The government is supposed to control. The government are not being able to control things. But don't think it is only because of the pandemic. Whenever you have a crisis, you tend to find that the government very often fails to control such crises, and very rarely they manage to overcome them. Now, one of the most important things that the government takes care of is the economy, because it is on that economy the rest of the things in the country or the state depends on. When you look at the world today, even before COVID, you'd notice the world definitely is going through a difficult time. There are some claims to the contrary, saying that no, it is not very difficult. Yet it is clear that the governance is deteriorating. Development is slowing down, and more states are in crisis. You look around the world and you find this happening, and that is creating a huge problem. But please do not think that this is happening now. This has actually started quite some time back. I told you I started writing about it in probably 2014 or 2012. I have now forgotten. I am very forgetful. Do not keep track of my own writings. But then I remember 2000, maybe 12, 13 or 14, I started initially writing. And that was primarily because all over the world there was a buzz for good governance. that you must not have only government, you must have governance, and the governance must be good governance. Well, I and my colleague and wife Manorama Sharma and a couple of other students of mine in Nehu were participants in a London School of Economics project called Crisis States, where we are trying to see how governance actually operate in those states which we thought were in crisis. And we found certain very, very interesting things. One of the things was that in most of these states, which were backward states, less developed countries as they were called, or underdeveloped countries, developing countries, these are the names given. The most important financial organizations in the world, the World Bank and the IMF, kept on saying that these countries are in crisis. They have not been able to develop, primarily because they don't have good governance. And when they talked of good governance, they said, well, good governance should mean good institutions. Good functioning of those institutions, participation of people in governance and economic development. Now in 2016, for the first time, when the World Bank delivered or published a major paper on economic prospects of the world and the global growth, it said that in that year itself, 2016, it continues even today, that the global growth rate has been disappointing. And they said that it slowed down to 2.4%, the GDP world growth rate. And it was an all-time low at that time. And then in 2020 now, what you find is that it is contracting by 5.2%. Most of you, if there are students of economics, they would know. But the others, when we say contraction, we actually mean that is shrinking. That world GDP is shrinking. It is in a deficit by what? 5.2% contraction. It is coming down. Unbelievable. And therefore, we have now the deepest global recession in the last few decades compared to last few decades. Per capita incomes in most of the developing economies are shrinking, and the World Bank in this report said that it will further go down. It's a very difficult situation. But please remember that the financial institutions of the world gave us a prescription for good governance. Actually, the whole idea of good governance is being bandied, that is being publicized, that is being advertised, is based on an assumption that economic reforms have failed in many countries due to lack of government transparency. The governments are not transparent, lack of government efficiency, and the failings of the important institutional arrangements in this. And therefore, they said that these two institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, seem to believe that neither good policies nor good investments are likely to emerge and be sustainable in an environment with dysfunctional institutions and poor governance. If your institutions are not working properly And if you do not have good governance, what will happen? Even if you make investments, even if you take good economic policies, it is not going to give you any good results. That is what these two important financial institutions of the world seem to believe, and this is there in most of their papers. Well, I have some slides and I'll transfer it to the organizers so that each of you can take copies of if you want. Those slides if you want. And these slides will also have the references which I'm using. When I'm talking about World Bank, which reference you'll get it in those slides. When I take a definition of governance, you'll know from where I have taken that. Now, the influential financial institutions of the world still persist with the idea that it is the developing countries that need to reform their governance. They are not talking of the advanced countries. It is only the developing countries which should bring in reforms, and they must try and improve their institutions. They tend to believe that in the advanced capitalist countries of the West, the governance is good, institutions are functioning properly, and therefore they are making development. That's what they say, or they believe. The World Bank Group president in 2015-16, Jim Young Kim, said that more than 40% of the world's poor live in the developing countries, where growth slows down. This is what he was saying. And therefore he said the developing countries should focus on building resilience to a weaker economic environment and shielding the most vulnerable. The benefits from the reforms to governance and business conditions are potentially large and could help offset the effects of the slow growth in larger economies. And this was quoted the World Development Report 2000 on poverty and development. Now, this was published by the World Bank itself. The good governance that these people are talking of epitomizes predictable, open, and enlightened policy making. A bureaucracy imbued with professional and executive arm of government accountable for its actions, and a strong civil society participating in public affairs, and all behaving under the rule of law. This raises the issues: what kind of a civil society and what kind of rule of law? You must remember that there is no universally accepted definition of rule of law. What might appear to be rule of law to you, it may not appear to be rule of law to others. In fact, in the most important concepts that you use in social sciences, in the study of society, are concepts about which there is hardly any unanimity. It is possible to critique any concept that is being presented in any discourse on society. One must remember that. And you notice that these people, the important scholars of particularly international political economy, scholars like Joel Demers, they are of the view that the focus of international financial institutions on good governance is just a new form of neoliberal economic conditionality. A new form of neoliberal economic conditionality, which is inherently a depoliticizing force. It tries to tell you that economy is not about politics, that people should not take recourse to protest when economy is down, because that is politics. It wants to, this particular idea wants to depoliticize. And there's another person called Mick Moore who points out that governance is an ideological product. That governance, he says, though you want to have a government which claim we are not playing politics, yet government is and governance is an ideological product. It is necessary to discuss these issues while dealing with the issue of governance. See, one must understand that development does not mean just growth. Development encompasses many things. It is shown by the qualitative improvement of circumstances in which people are. You live in certain condition, and if there is a qualitative improvement of those conditions wholly, then you can call it development. Otherwise, you can call it merely growth and not development. There's a difference economists have been making for a long, long time now, that growth, merely growth is not development. Development is a little more than that. And governance always aims at development. And as Moore says, this is right, that all developments must make a qualitative improvement of the circumstances in which you live. Unless your life is improved, it cannot be called developed. A country might achieve the goal of a GDP of, say, 16%. But there may be large poor people in that country who remains at the bottom, and you cannot do anything to their conditions of life. That will not be developed. One must remember that. This means that when something develops, then the quality of the whole society improves, or a section about which the development is claimed, the entire section improves. Therefore, development would be growth plus change for better. Now the problem is, what is better, again, is a very, very debatable thing. What looks to my dear Narendra Modi to be better may not necessarily look better to you and me. He thought, for instance, demonetization was good. It was better than what was happening at the time. And you know what happened. For him, it is a good thing to do. Or to sell off the public sector industries all over the country, he thinks it is good because it brings in money into the hands of government. But you know that when the private sector comes in the place of the public sector, people lose jobs. Is that a better life for them? It is not. Public sector production becomes more expensive, therefore things are more costly. Private sector production becomes more expensive, therefore things become costly. Private sector employs people on a hire and fire basis. There is no certainty of your job. But if it's a public sector, then you are governed by a set of rules which will probably give you a durability of your income and some assurance as retirement benefits even after you cease to work. At your old days, they'll take care. This is what has been happening, in this country. And therefore, what they are doing, what this government thinks is better for the country, is actually not better for the country when we look at it from your and my perspective. Remember that. Or for instance, not allowing dissent would look to be good to the government. But for the rest of the people who want to raise their voice because they have grievances, they have difficulties, for them, well, dissent is very, very important. I cannot stop. I cannot but restrain myself from mentioning something else to all of you, which is connected to this idea of development. It's a very current and important thing in India today, so far as governance is concerned. So you know that the governance, all kinds of governance, will have a legislature and an executive judiciary. I don't know how many of you have heard of a man called Prashant Bhushan. I don't know if you have heard. Have you? There is a man called Prashant Bhushan. He is a senior advocate. Yes, he is a senior advocate who has just made two tweets. One about our Chief Justice riding a 50 lakh word bike belonging to a BJP led Chief Justice of India was sitting on it in the Raj Bhavan, and he was not wearing a mask. Though the people around him were wearing masks, this is COVID time. Prashant Bhushan said, and he was not wearing a helmet also. Prashant Bhushan said, this nonsense. If this Chief Justice of the country does this, well, it becomes a huge problem. You are setting a bad precedent. And moreover, you are supposed, when you ride a bike, you are supposed to wear a helmet. What are you telling people? That you can violate rules. Then he later discovered that the bike was on a stand, but in a public space. And therefore he said, okay, this was a mistake, but he should have worn his mask because otherwise he is encouraging others not to wear mask, though the government has made it compulsory. And then he said that the last four Chief Justices of India have brought the Supreme Court down in a manner that it has harmed the court, has been contributing to the decline of democracy in India by not acting properly. And he gave a whole lot of, not in the tweet, but in an affidavit, gave a whole lot of examples. I'm sorry. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the Supreme Court of India, suo motu on its own, decided to take cognizance of these tweets and said Prashant Bhushan is guilty of contempt of court. Because he has humiliated the Supreme Court. He has brought down the prestige or dignity of the Supreme Court. There are scholars who have pointed out that these judges of the Supreme Court, and now they are not being held up for contempt, that these judges of Supreme Court, most judges of Supreme Court, do not even understand what dignity is. To be very frank, to write a 50 lakh word belonging to someone else, to a political party leader, see that justice, does that have dignity? Obviously, it does not behove of a judge, Chief Justice, of doing that. Judges do not generally socialize with people. And you enjoy sitting on the bike of a person who is a leader of the ruling party. Well, that brings the dignity of the judge, Chief Justice of India down. Prashant Bhushan also had in 2011 said something which again is being opened by the Supreme Court. What he said, of the last 8 chief justices, them were corrupt. And he of course said that corruption is not only taking money, corruption is not your doing your duty properly, not conducting yourself in a manner you should conduct yourself properly. That if you do not do that, that itself is corruption for a judge. Anyway, what has happened is very, very interesting, that while defending Prashant Bhushan, 2 of the most important lawyers of this country told the Supreme Court that what you are doing today by trying to silence dissent is the greatest harm to democracy. Prashant Bhushan quoted Gandhi and told the court told him that you apologize, we will not punish you. Prashant Bhushan quoted Gandhi and said, I will not, as Gandhi said, not apologize. I will not regret. I will not amend. I will not ask for pardon. I will accept the punishment. But I tell you, I have not committed any offense. Tomorrow, Prashant Bhushan is supposed to be punished by the court. I don't know what will happen. There's a lot of protest. Now, look, what is happening is, what I'm trying to explain to you is that from the perspective of Justice Bobde, the Chief Justice of India, probably it is better to pay your obeisance to the judges. Most of our lawyers call them my lord, which I found very, very feudal. They think that is better. You should be afraid of the judges. That is better. And for Prashant Bhushan and for me, both of us, in a sense, are also colleagues in Swaraj Avidan, and we have been friends for a long, long time. I've been trying to save democracy in a sense. For us, well, the judge is just like me. Only because he has a duty, he sits there. Like I think the president is only the first citizen of India. He is like me, a citizen. He has 1 vote, I have 1 vote. But for us, this kind of hierarchy in the state, in the democratic state, is not good. But for them, they think it is better. So when you say you must have growth for better, you don't know which is better. It will all depend on what is your perspective. If you are a laborer, then raising the salary is better. And, well, paying the laborer as little as possible is better for business. So one must understand these kind of things and therefore be a little careful about this whole idea of development being connected to the idea of governance or good governance. See, there are things, I had given you a couple of examples, but I want to give you one more example from Assam itself. For instance, building big dams for power means development for metropolitan areas of India. When they build this dam in Subansiri, the electricity go, most of it will go to Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, Bangalore now, and Ahmedabad. These kind of places where you have factories, you have a whole lot of money, it will go there. Even today, Delhi does not produce any electricity, you must be knowing that. Delhi has no rivers. Delhi does not have coal bases to produce thermal power. Yet, if you live in Delhi, there is no power cut. You produce electricity, Meghalaya produces electricity, and you have power cuts. You should know what happens. It goes to the center of power and center of economy, benefits. So if they build a big dam for generation of power, it will mean it is development for India and also areas. But the settlers in the lower parts of Assam, for them, big dam is a matter of fear. You have seen how dams release water during flood and then it devastates the rest of the lower part of the lower settlement areas. So you must remember that there is no one kind of thing which can be said to be better. When you say change for better, you should ask change for better for whom? Is it for the rich? Is it for the poor? Is it for only the Hindus or is it for everybody in our country? Is it for only men or is it also for women? Now these questions are being raised by the feminists. What is good for men need not necessarily be good for women. Keeping the wives in the kitchen and asking them to raise children is very good for men. The life of men for better, you would remember that they would prefer the wives to remain at home. Even if you want to work, work from home, because you have to look after the house, the children, and when I come back tired from office, I must be given a cup of tea. You are the wife, and that is good for men. But is that good for women? It is not. I'm telling you that all oppressed sections, whether they are women, they are oppressed all over the world. And the laborers, they are also oppressed all over the world. For these kind of people, the idea of development is a different idea because they look at the reality from a different perspective of their own station in life, as I'd call it. Therefore, one must understand that there are things about which we need to rethink. When the World Bank tells you that you must have good governance, and good governance means development, and development means what? Economic development, growth, increasing your GDP. When we talk of concepts like the governance, development, and state, we must first categorically state the political perspective from which we are approaching these concepts. So good governance, because the idea is not only merely governance. When they say governance, they mean good governance. You remember 2014 speech of our present Prime Minister. His most important slogan was minimum government, maximum governance, because governance is supposed to be doing good. And therefore, he said minimum government. And what you will have is maximum governance. Now, good governance as a concept has emerged in the context of the development discourse only. One must understand, when you talk of good governance, it has emerged as a concept only in the context of the development discourse. What ought to be development? How do you look at development? In that context only, the idea of this new idea of governance, good governance, maximum governance, these things emerge. But when social scientists look at it, there are various kinds of perspectives. For the financial institutions, most important financial institutions in the world, when they say that you must have good governance, there are certain conditionalities. These are conditionalities for giving you aid, which actually is loan. They call it aid. World Bank will give you loan if you do this to improve your governance. You will have to have good governance, only then you will be economic development. And for that, you need good institution, you need good rules, you need good bureaucracy, and you must have an open market. And this is called structural adjustment. Unfortunately, wherever this structural adjustment have been imposed by the World Bank, the economies are going down. They are not going up, except for one or two East Asian small countries. Small countries, there's a lot of money pumped in, then you can do it. But in major countries, poor countries of the world, developing countries, but there is enormous amount of data now that structural adjustment, which is the conditionality of good governance, actually brings the rate of growth and the development country down. It does not help. One must remember that. And there's a lot of uh, writings about it, there's a lot of discourse about it. I was supposed to talk, I'm sorry, I'm getting, yeah. I was supposed to talk also democracy from the development. I was trying to tell you what is happening in the current debate. There is this idea of democracy also. Are democratic governments good? Does good governance also means democratic government? Do you need democracy for good governance? It's something very interesting. One of the most celebrated political scientists, a person who is celebrated highly in the United States of America, in the entire West, and also in most circles in India, has said something very interesting. All of you must be knowing this gentleman. His name is Fukuyama. Have you heard of Fukuyama? No? Or yes? Fukuyama tells us, he wrote in 2013 actually, and tells us that good governance is the government's ability to make and enforce rules and to deliver services regardless, remember, regardless of whether that government is democratic or not. He said good governance is not related to democracy. So if you have a Hitler enforcing rules properly, manages to deliver services, but at the same time kills the Jews, silences everybody, your freedom is taken away, and you are forced to change his name all the time, bow your head to the Führer. Well, that is good governance. That is governance. It is a very, very interesting thing that the most important countries of the world have been trying to tell us that you do not need. These are, Fukuyama is celebrated in United States of America. And it is Fukuyama who tells you from United States of America that you don't need to be a democracy if you want development and good governance. Your governance could be good if you can enforce rules, if you can deliver services, but it is irrespective whether you are a good, whether you are a democracy or not, whether people have their voice or not. But remember, pre-1989, the Western debate on governance was around the idea of democracy. They were trying to tell us there are two kinds of governments in the world. One is a democratic government, which is the Western capitalist liberal democratic governance, and you have the totalitarian governance in Soviet Union, in those days China, in those days Soviet Union, the communist countries. This was the most important thing that was emphasized by the West whenever they were talking of government. If you read old textbooks published in 1960s, 70s, you'll find this idea. These are the things which we were taught when I was in my BA classes. That the West is liberal, West is democratic, Russia is totalitarian, communists are bad, and therefore those are bad governments. Now today, the people like Fukuyama and World Bank and IMF would tell you it is immaterial whether you are a democracy or not. What you need is ability to enforce rules. If Himanta Biswa Sharma can ask the police to beat you up to enforce rules, that is good governance. Whether he can prevent the spread is immaterial because people are demanding that. One must understand these things, that there are differences of opinion about what kind of government is good government. In a paper which was published, I think I might be having a copy of it, yeah, in this book, Growth and Human Development in Northeast India, published by Oxford University Press. I had argued about 3 years back that when you look at, compare the two kinds of democracies in the world. One, the Russians, when they were communists, even then they were claiming that they were democratic in the sense that everybody was a part of the party and party had democracy. That once the party takes a decision, then the people have to obey. And they were saying that we are a democracy because our people participate in our governance and the life of people are being better under us. And therefore we are better than the Western capitalist countries. This is what the Russians were arguing. It's something very interesting that if you are talking in terms of Fukuyama, that you should be able to enforce rules and deliver services, then something very interesting happened. That Russia, pre-1917, you remember I have said this in this book, a chapter in this book, pre-1917, before the revolution, Russia was one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the most illiterate countries in the world. Its health system was so bad, lakhs of people used to die in malaria, hunger. And the revolution took place, communists came to power. What happened? From 1970 to 1960, a country which was virtually illiterate, largely illiterate, could overcome all that and develop science and technology in a manner that it defeated the United States of America, the most powerful Western capitalist country, in this race in going to the space. The first Sputnik was sent to the space by Russia. First man, Gagarin, was sent by Russia, and the United States of America was lagging behind. The people improved remarkably, so much so that the Western to say that the Russian women now look very healthy because they are given hormone injection. And this is a small thing I'll tell you, and then I can give you a little time to ask questions if you want. I'll tell you something. Sunil Gangopadhyay, one of the most celebrated novelists from Bengal, had gone to Russia, and he came back, and in Desh Patrika, he wrote up, and he said, what kind of a country is that, Russia? If you want to buy half a kilo of butter, you have to queue up. You have to queue up. There is not a thing which you can buy without actually queuing up. And look at our country, so good. Whenever you want to buy butter, you can buy. Whenever you want to buy mutton, you can buy. You don't need to. Queue up for this. I remember being pointed out in a letter. In your country, in those days, if you wanted to buy 1 liter of kerosene, you had to queue up. If you wanted to buy 1 kg of sugar, you had to queue up. And meat, people cannot afford, therefore there are no queues. In those countries, in Russia at that time at least, that people could afford things and therefore they were queuing up. Well, that led to a small debate there. I was no longer a participant, I was very fellow at the time. But that is true. That there are, if you accept Fukuyama's definition, then you will say the communist countries were better government and they governed better, therefore there was better governance than the West. I don't think that is also true. Governance would require democracy in the sense because democracy happens to a government by person. I must be able to govern myself or anyone should be able to govern me only by good conduct. If I do not have consent, I should not be bothered. I am an individual human being and I must use my faculties and enjoy my life and exercise my liberty. This is what I would say. People might have good food to eat, but if they don't have freedom, then they are very unhappy. Therefore, when you talk of governance and good governance, as described by people like Fukuyama, this is called, I'll give you the reference, this is already in the slides, but I'm reading it out to you. Fukuyama wrote in 2013, it is called What is Governance? And this was published in an international journal called Governance in its 26th volume, number 3, pages 347, 368. So I'm telling you the reference, you'll be able to take it from the slides. I'm finishing now. And I'm telling you only two things. That the idea of the good governance actually was an attempt at bringing in competitive liberal market in all the world. It was a part also of the process of globalization. And what happens in globalization, you have seen now multinational corporations start controlling everything. As long time back, some philosophers have said, the big fish eats up the small ones. And this is what happened. But then these institutions are institutions which will propagate this, they are propagating it. It is necessary to critique it and develop our own idea of good governance. Idea of good governance would mean that a government which can give good amenities to people, make life of people better, but also enable people to express themselves and have freedom. The freedoms which are generally talked of as personal liberties, individual liberties. Without that, it is not good governance. I'm sorry I've taken more time than I thought I would take, but if there are still questions, I would like to answer them. Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir, you can hear you. Jyotsna,
Yeah. Is
Jyotsna
that,
ma'am?
she's off, I think. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Juska is not being able to.
Yes, sir.
I can't hear her.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
ma'am,
Thank you
okay.
very much, sir, for your fluent deliberations covering all the agendas you have spoke on. So now may I request our participants, after listening to your valuable speech, do they have any queries or any observations?
Yeah.
So
But
here in the chat box, I have found one that one of our participants wants to know, can you demonstrate transparency in your decisions?
no. Demonstrate transparency. Yeah. Right.
In your decisions.
Not in my decisions. How can I am not a government. I am talking of governance. I am expecting the government to be transparent. Well, even as individuals, I believe if I occupy a public position, then I will have to be transparent. Meaning that when I take a decision, you must know how I have arrived at the decision and why I have taken that. Unless I can give you reasons for it and tell you that this is the process through which I have arrived at that decision, I am not transparent. So most decisions that the government take are opaque. They are not transparent. But there are some which they are forced to be transparent. One of the ways in India we have done it is through that right to information. And we want to know this and you must give us information about it. That is how you make government decision transparent. But unfortunately, you know that even for the PM care now, the government is saying, will not tell you why, where, how much money we have, to whom we have given. Opaque. That is not good governance. Good governance will have to be a governance which will be, people will be able to see how the process is going. I would expect the Supreme Court proceedings, which are now only through videos, well, those should be made public. You and I should be able to see that, access it. That is what transparency is all about. Yes?
Yes.
You agree or you don't? Yeah?
Yeah, it is an observation of one of the participants, sir. Yeah, but
That's
I
a,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
No. See, I like people who do not agree with it. Then I can learn from them. If they agree with it, yeah, Deepak Chakraborty,
Yeah,
somebody,
one of the participants is reporting, sir, very, very true and genuine issues transparency. He has been reporting. Parag Dotto is reported.
yeah.
Another one observation is coming, sir. Sir, what is your opinion on our government responding to the demands of globalization?
See, unfortunately, whether it is Manmohan Singh or Narendra Modi, all of them submitted to the demands of the World Bank and the processes of globalization. See, China has done that. China is now a participant in the globalization, process of globalization. But they've done that only when their economy has become stable and come to a particular standard. They have made their own production units ready to enter the global market. India did not do that, unfortunately, because our entering globalized world was at a period when we were facing a financial crisis. We had a foreign debt which we could not pay back, and therefore we asked for loan from World Bank. And World Bank said, okay, you open up, you get into the globalized world. We did. And then we started saying all these things, the world is a village, the global world actually is a global village. We kept on saying that. It is not, we know now. That globalization enables the multinational companies to take resources and capital out of the countries where they invest. Our government talks of too much of investment through globalization, but investment is made to make profit. Remember that. Profit means taking it away from you and me and giving it to them. Yes. Any other question or observation?
Not yet. The chat box.
Respected sir, I have just an observation of
Yes.
late. On one hand, sir, our country is on one hand, our country is talking about privatization. We are making a shift towards privatization, and
Ah,
on the other hand, of late, our honorable Prime Minister, he is again addressing a new issue that is vocal for local. So, don't you think it's a dual and a contradictory stand? So, which one should we actually embark upon?
see, don't take the pronouncement of your politicians in their face value. It is, do you need to? I don't know. I'm honestly asking you as a citizen now, not only as a professor of political science and as a research person, even as a common citizen, I'm asking you this question. Haven't you seen that this gentleman tells something and then forgets it? Therefore,
Exactly, sir.
you will say two different things at the same time. It doesn't matter to him. He needs to suit the interest of some people, therefore he will say local. He
Yes,
needs
sir.
to suit the interest of the international market, he will say global. Our dear Prime Minister is one who is a very good actor. And therefore, he will do this to suit his audience. What he says to the multinationals, when he goes to the chambers of commerce meetings, you must have seen that. Those things come in TV now. He is a different person. And when he talks to you and me, he's a different person. And now, because you and me are suffering because of COVID, you must have seen our Prime Minister has not had the time to take care of his own beard, own hair. He is not the stylish Prime Minister that you saw in 2016-17. Today, 16, 17, 18, he was wearing very good suits, going everywhere. That man was, uh, very smart, stylish man. And today, he appears to you disheveled hair, beard unkept, looks very, as if he is one of us. So he looks at his audience and does he what needs to do or says what he needs to say. I think it is contradictory. You cannot say both the things. We have not been able to do what is necessary local. We have not been able to do. He said, make in India. And then the Make in India now, the whole project, people are saying was funded by a Chinese company. Now, what is this nonsense? So I don't take him seriously at all. He is a person who can please people and therefore win vote. That's okay. He is also very smart in uh, machinations, in creating situations which is favorable to him. That's okay. But I don't think I take him seriously at all.
Yes, sir. We people actually are being befooled by these kind of contradictory slogans time and again. And I myself, being from a discipline of political science, I myself feel that we are being deceived by this kind of fake promises and slogans. Okay, sir.
Well, deception is a part of politics. Politics is the art of the possible. So the
Yes,
prime minister will do what is possible for him to remain in power.
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Any,
sir.
yeah. Any other question?
Yes, sir. One more question is here. So, do you think the socialist country in our constitution
Ah,
preamble is null and void?
I don't know. What do you
Do
mean?
you think that socialist country?
Yeah, I understand the question. See,
Yes.
what I'm trying to explain is that what is there in the constitution cannot be null and void. When you say null and void, it is generally things which are not according to law or according to the constitution. That will be null and void. How can this be null and void? You might say it is not acceptable for us. That's a different thing. Whether you want to be a socialist country or you don't want to be a socialist country. See, despite everything, these ideas of the constitution, not a single government has been able to completely ignore it. For instance, the Bharatiya Janata Party talks of Gandhian socialism. Why?
Mm.
You must remember this. I don't think it is null and void. For the conditions that India is today, or Mrs. Gandhi was very, very perceptive, very intelligent. Though I didn't like because she is the one who has put me, 18 months in jail during the emergency. Yet I say she was one of the most perceptive leaders who knew that this country had that large population which is below the poverty line. And only socialism can bring that up. Not the Russian kind of socialism, not the Chinese socialism, probably a different kind of socialism where there is some amount of democracy, freedom, and at the same time, some amount of equality. Today, you must be knowing that 18 people in this country owns, each one of them owns so much of wealth that each one of them can buy off the government of India. The budget, Indian budget is about one-sixth of the wealth that Ambani has. Like Jigandar Jadan keeps saying in the TV studios that that is the Bara Sarkar. He says the Bara Sarkar is the Ambani Sarkar. Bara Sarkar is the Ambani Sarkar, he would say, because he is richer than the government itself. And at the same time, you have people begging on the street. You have children who are absolutely unfed. There is no health care to large majority of people. In this kind of situation, you need egalitarianism and socialism of some kind, which can give some succor to people. Anyway, yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I think no more queries or questions are here in the chat box as well as yet. Okay, one more is coming, sir. Yet at
Now,
present, extensive consumerism, commercialization of basic and entities, I think, entities have diverted the system away from socialism. In my view, he is giving his observation as a view.
I think he is
Yes,
right
yeah.
that the government of India its attention has been diverted. And please remember, it is not only happening in India. Consumerism is the order of the day. It is a consumerist society today. That creates a problem. Anyway,
Okay.
is that all?
Respected participants. Well, respected participants, if you have got any more, you can just share in the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there is no more any queries, sir.
Only saying
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, sir. Sir Leslie, I thank you very much, sir, for being a part of us today. You giving a deliberation. You have delivered about the meaning of the government. You explain in a story manner. Good governance should mean good institutions. Absolutely right, sir. I also agree with you. How the world GDP economy is decreasing due to COVID-19 pandemic. You have elaborated. The data you delivered in your lecture showing the World Development Report is helpful indeed. The way you have highlighted about public and private sector is really mind-blowing. Your lecture immensely made us understand about our surroundings regarding governance, democracy, and development. So, sir, being a part of us today, sparing your time and presenting a wonderful deliberation, I, on behalf of Center for Ethnic Studies and Research, extends my thanks and gratitude. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, sir. And for the participants, dear participants, here is an announcement.